All right, so we just finished coloring our systemic and our pulmonary system. So now we're going to go ahead and look at the flow of that blood with what happens inside the actual heart. So we have the heart. Eventually, by the end of this, we are going to draw this drawing. All right, it's going to be spectacular. So the heart, this is where the pumping happens. Okay, so your heart is this awesome muscle that needs to pump blood. Now, our heart, our mammalian heart, has four chambers. We are going to talk about later about different types of hearts and different systems of circulation. Now, our heart is a two-way pump because it propels blood to the body, but then it propels blood out of the aorta into the body, right? But then it also propels blood into our lungs. So this is why we have a two-way pump. And not only does it leave, but it also comes back, right? So leaves, comes back, leaves, come back. So we have to think about that. So our heart's a two-way pump, propels blood throughout the body in the body when we talk about organ systems, but then our lungs as well. Okay, so it's got two directions that it goes, and we have four different chambers. So the cardiac cycle is the events during the beat of your heart. Now, this is super basic as far as what you guys are responsible for knowing. Now, when you go into tech school, you will need to know when we talk about cardiac cycle, this is the the electro pulses that cause the waves on the EKG machine. We don't need to know those here, so we're not going to dive into it. There's P, T, Z, V, C. There's all these different letters and these waves and what they mean and distances. But again, we don't need to know that, but that is the cardiac cycle. It's the electrical pulses that cause that beat to happen. So it's the events during the beat. What we're going to look at, what's important for us during the beat is just where the heart, where the blood is flowing through the actual heart. Okay. So we have systole and we have diastole or diastole. It all kind of depends on who you talk to, what you're going to learn how to pronounce it. But the top is systole. This is the contraction of the heart. So this is that squeezing. Mrs. Ritter was like, think of a cyst, which a cyst is like a pimple. And how many of you love to squeeze and pop your pimples, right? So think of a cyst and systole and then that contraction because you're squeezing. Diastole is just the relaxation of the heart. Super morbid, but what happens when you die? You relax, you're not doing anything. So I think of that when I think of diastole is just that relaxation. This is also, I put it in this manner because your systole, when you look at blood pressure, this is the top number is your systole number, and then the diastole is the bottom number. So it's measuring your blood pressure is actually measuring the pressure during a contraction and measuring the pressure then during a relaxation. So that's what your blood pressure is actually talking about when those numbers are there. So systole is the top number, and then diastole is the bottom number. So now we're going to break down the actual flow. Now, when you guys are writing this in your notes, I want you to write the arrow. So you should write the arrow to help you guys see the flow of how the blood is working in the heart. So we're going to start with the right atrium. So you can see the blood flows in the supravena cava into the right atrium. And so this is all carbon dioxide rich blood or deoxygenated blood, and that's from that vena cava. Okay, so it travels from the vena cava into the right atrium. From the right atrium, it's going to travel through this cool valve and it's going to go into the right ventricle. And so the right ventricle again receives blood from the right atrium via this tricuspid valve. Okay, and then it goes into the right ventricle. Now, that valve is there to prevent a backflow of blood. When we talk about animals having a heart murmur, we're actually listening to these valves because it's the valves then that have some trauma to them or some damage or some malfunction, and that's causing the murmur, or one of the things that causes murmurs are the valves. All right, so we have that right ventricle. It receives blood from the right atrium via that tricuspid valve. So from here, we're going to go up that branch into the pulmonary artery. And then we go into the lungs. And what happens in the lungs? Well, gas exchange is happening, right? So the lungs are responsible for gas exchange. So we're taking our carbon dioxide rich blood and then we're sending it away to get oxygen into our system. So once we get oxygen into our system from our lungs, we're going to go into our pulmonary vein and into the left atrium. So once we're in this left atrium, this is going to be oxygen rich blood now because it came from the lungs. And what are the lungs doing? Gas exchange. So they come into the pulmonary, from the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. And then I'm going to go through this mitral valve to my left ventricle. All right, so my left ventricle then receives blood from the left atrium and pumps the blood out of the aorta. So I have this aortic valve right here, and the blood's going to go and pump right out of it. So all of this, how does this happen? Have you ever thought about how your blood is flowing? Do you ever actually tell your body, hey, body, start to flow some blood right now? No, you don't. It's because this all happens with the autonomic nervous system. So it's auto or self, right? It's autonomic. And so it operates independently of conscious thought to maintain your internal environment or your homeostasis. And so when we talk about homeostasis, this is how your body is your 97.7 or 98.8, whatever your temperature is you normally run. That's your homeostasis. If you right now are like, hey, stop flowing blood, and you try to think really, really hard, or you try to think really, really hard and tell yourself, hey, stop breathing, you might try to hold your breath, but your body's going to take over, right? And I can't tell myself like, hey, I can hold my pulse right now, but there's no way that I can say stop doing that. And that's because it's the autonomic nervous system. So that's what makes this whole thing work. It's pretty awesome. So now that we've gone through that, we are going to go ahead and we are going to color and label our cartoon in our Jamboard or in our paper copy. And again, we are going to end up with this colored picture right here. Okay, so this is where we're going to end up with all of these words that are here. We're going to put in our own diagram. And once we go ahead and color and label our heart, I want to make sure that you guys go ahead and write your summary. So if you want to write your summary before you color, that's super fine, or before you draw, that's absolutely okay, because we're going to go ahead now and we're going to show us how to do that image.